A millionaire forced his son to marry a single mother. The family laughed. But in the end, everyone was impressed. Maxwell Thornton III stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, gazing out at the Manhattan skyline. The city sprawled before him, a testament to human ambition and the power of wealth. Yet, as he watched the ant-like figures scurrying about their lives far below, he felt a deep-seated unease. His empire, Thornton Industries, was at its peak. The company's stock prices soared, its influence reached across continents, and its innovations were shaping the future. But Maxwell's greatest concern wasn't listed on any balance sheet or annual report. It was his son, James. At 28, James Thornton was the very picture of a spoiled heir. He spent his days lounging by pools, his nights in exclusive clubs, and seemed to have a new model on his arm every week. The young man had no concept of responsibility, no drive to achieve, and worst of all, no respect for the legacy Maxwell had spent his life building. A soft knock at the door interrupted Maxwell's brooding. "Come in," he called, not turning from the window. His assistant Sarah entered quietly. "Mr. Thornton, your 2 o'clock is here." Maxwell nodded, finally tearing his gaze from the city below. "Send her in, please." As Sarah left, Maxwell moved to his desk, straightening his tie and composing himself. A moment later, a young woman entered, her steps hesitant, but her chin held high. "Mr. Thornton," she said, her voice soft but steady, "I'm Eleanor Morales. Thank you for seeing me." Maxwell gestured to the chair across from him. "Please sit down, Ms. Morales." Elena perched on the edge of the seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She was pretty in a wholesome way, with warm brown eyes and dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her clothes were simple but clean, the uniform of the Thornton Mansion's kitchen staff. "I understand you're here about the position of head chef at the mansion," Maxwell began. Eleanor nodded eagerly. "Yes, sir. I've been working in the kitchen for 3 years now, and I believe I'm ready for more responsibility. I have some ideas for improving efficiency and expanding the menu options." As Elena spoke, her initial nervousness faded, replaced by a passion that lit up her face. Maxwell found himself impressed by her articulation and obvious dedication. "Your current supervisor speaks highly of you," Maxwell said, "but I have to ask, why do you want this position? It's a significant step up in responsibility." Elena took a deep breath. "To be honest, Mr. Thornton, it's not just about the job. I'm a single mother to a 5-year-old daughter, Sophia. This promotion would allow me to provide her with better opportunities, to save for her future. And..." She hesitated, then forged ahead. "I want to show her that with hard work and determination, we can achieve our dreams." Maxwell leaned back in his chair, studying Eleanor. In that moment, an idea began to form, one so outlandish, so potentially disastrous, that he almost dismissed it immediately. "And yet, Ms. Morales," he said slowly, "I'm going to make you an unusual proposition, one that, if you accept, will change both our lives dramatically." Elena's brow furrowed in confusion. "Sir?" Maxwell stood pacing behind his desk. "You see, I have a son, James. He's about your age, actually. But unlike you, he has no concept of responsibility, no drive to succeed. He's squandering his potential and the opportunities he's been given." He turned to face Elena, his expression grave. "What I'm about to propose is unconventional, to say the least, but I believe it could be mutually beneficial." Elena shifted in her seat, unsure where this was going. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Thornton?" Maxwell took a deep breath. "I want you to marry my son." The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor's mouth opened and closed several times, no sound emerging. Finally, she managed to stammer, I don't understand." "It would be a marriage of convenience," Maxwell explained, warming to his idea. "In exchange for marrying James and helping him learn responsibility, you would receive not just the head chef position, but a significant salary increase. Your daughter would have access to the best schools, the best opportunities, and you would have the resources to pursue your culinary studies further." Elena stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Mr. Thornton, I came here to interview for a job, not to be part of some bizarre arranged marriage." Maxwell held up his hands placatingly. "I understand this is shocking, but please hear me out. This arrangement would be for a set period, let's say 2 years. During that time, you would live in the mansion, work as the head chef, and help James learn the value of hard work. If at the end of that time you both wish to end the marriage, it can be dissolved with no penalty. You would retain your position and the benefits for your daughter. Elena sank back into her chair, her mind reeling. "This is insane," she muttered. "Perhaps," Maxwell agreed. "But consider the opportunities it would provide for your daughter, and for yourself. With the resources of the Thornton family behind you, you could achieve things you've only dreamed of." Elena's thoughts whirled. It was crazy, unethical even. And yet, the thought of Sophia in a good school, of having the means to provide her with everything she needed, was tempting. And the idea of furthering her own culinary education. "What about your son?" she asked suddenly. "Does he agree to this?" Maxwell's expression tightened. "James will do as I say if he wants to maintain his current lifestyle. And who knows, perhaps having a hard-working, responsible partner will be good for him." Eleanor stood again, more slowly this time. I need time to think about this, Mr. Thornton. It's a lot to process." Maxwell nodded. "Of course, take a few days, but remember, Ms. Morales, opportunities like this don't come along often. Sometimes we have to take risks to change our lives." As Elena left the office, her head spinning, neither she nor Maxwell could have predicted the chain of events they had just set in motion. A journey that would challenge them all and redefine the meaning of family, love, and success. James Thornton lounged by the pool of his father's Hamptons estate, a half-empty glass of scotch dangling from his fingers. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, but James barely noticed. His mind was still reeling from the bombshell his father had dropped on him earlier that day. "You want me to what?" James had exclaimed, nearly choking on his drink. Maxwell Thornton III had fixed his son with a steely gaze. "You heard me, James. You're going to marry Elena Morales, our new head chef. It's time you learned some responsibility." James had laughed, certain it was a joke. But as his father laid out the terms, marry Eleanor for 2 years, learn to work in the family business or be cut off entirely, the laughter died in his throat. Now, as the last rays of sunlight disappeared beyond the horizon, James drained his glass. How had it come to this? Sure, he enjoyed the good life, but was that really so wrong? He was young, rich, and good-looking. Wasn't he supposed to have fun? The sound of footsteps on the patio interrupted his brooding. James turned to see a petite brunette approaching hesitantly. "Mr. Thornton," she called softly. "I'm Elena Morales." James stood, suddenly very aware of his rumpled shorts and unbuttoned shirt. "Right, the chef. My fiancé." The word felt strange on his tongue. Elena stepped closer, the fading light catching the nervous sheen in her eyes. "I thought we should talk about all this." James gestured to a nearby lounge chair. "Be my guest." "Drink?" Eleanor shook her head. "No, thank you. I don't drink much. I have a daughter to think about." "Ah, yes. The kid." James collapsed back onto his chair. "Look, I'm sure you're very nice and all, but this whole thing is insane. You can't seriously be considering it." Eleanor's chin lifted slightly. "Actually, I am. For my daughter's sake, if nothing else. The opportunities this would provide for her, I can't ignore that." James studied her, really looking at her for the first time. She was pretty, in a girl-next-door kind of way, nothing like the models and socialites he usually dated, but there was a quiet strength in her posture, a determination in her eyes that intrigued him. "And what about you?" he asked. "What do you get out of this besides a meal ticket for your kid?" Elena's eyes flashed. "I'm not looking for a meal ticket, Mr. Thornton. I work hard for what I have. This arrangement would allow me to further my culinary education, to pursue my dreams of opening my own restaurant someday. And yes, it would provide security for my daughter. Is that so wrong?" James held up his hands in surrender. "Hey, no judgment here. We've all got our reasons, right? I'm doing this to keep my trust fund. You're doing it for your kid and your career. Seems fair." Elena sighed, some of the fight leaving her. "Look, I know this isn't ideal for either of us, but if we're going to do this, maybe we could try to make the best of it. I'm not asking for romance or even friendship, just mutual respect. And maybe you could try to be a positive presence in Sophia's life." James felt a twinge of something unfamiliar, guilt, perhaps. "Yeah, okay, I can do that. I'm not completely heartless, you know." despite what my father might think. A small smile touched Elena's lips. I'm glad to hear it. So, I guess we're doing this. James raised an imaginary glass. To the most bizarre business arrangement of the century. May we both get what we want and not kill each other in the process. Elena's smile widened slightly. I'll drink to that. Metaphorically, of course. As they sat in companionable silence watching the stars emerge, neither James nor Eleanor could have predicted the journey that lay ahead, a path that would challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves and each other. The wedding, held just 2 weeks later, was a small private affair. Maxwell Thornton III stood at the back of the family chapel, watching as his son and Elena exchanged vows. James looked uncomfortable in his tuxedo, shifting from foot to foot as he recited the words. Eleanor, in a simple white dress, spoke her vows softly but firmly. In the front row, a little girl with Eleanor's dark hair and big brown eyes watched with a mixture of confusion and excitement. Sophia didn't fully understand what was happening, but she knew it meant she and her mom were moving into a big new house with lots of rooms to explore. As the newlyweds walked back down the aisle, Maxwell caught James's eye. His son's expression was a mix of resignation and defiance. Maxwell nodded slightly, hoping against hope that this unconventional plan would work. Later that evening, as Elena tucked Sophia into bed in their new suite at the Thornton mansion, the little girl asked, "Mommy, is Mr. James my daddy now?" Eleanor hesitated, unsure how to explain the complexity of the situation to a 5-year-old. "Well, sweetie, James is going to be living with us and helping to take care of us, but you don't have to call him Daddy if you don't want to. We'll just take it one day at a time, okay?" Sophia nodded, her eyelids growing heavy. "Okay, Mommy, I like his funny jokes." As Elena kissed her daughter goodnight and slipped out of the room, she found James waiting in the hallway. "Everything okay?" he asked, looking uncharacteristically awkward. Elena nodded. "Yes, she's just excited about the new house. And apparently she likes your jokes." A small smile tugged at James's lips. "Well, at least someone appreciates my sense of humor. Look, Eleanor, I know this isn't a real marriage, but I meant what I said about trying to be good for Sophia. I've never really been around kids, but I'll do my best." Elena felt a warmth in her chest that surprised her. "Thank you, James, that means a lot." As they headed to their separate bedrooms, an arrangement they'd agreed upon for the sake of appearances, Elena couldn't help but wonder what the coming days and weeks would bring. This marriage might be unconventional, but perhaps, just perhaps, it could lead to something positive for all of them. Little did they know, their journey was only just beginning. The first few weeks of their arranged marriage were a study in contrasts. Eleanor threw herself into her new role as head chef with enthusiasm, revamping menus and streamlining kitchen operations. James, on the other hand, struggled to adjust to his father's expectation that he start learning the family business. Their interactions were awkward at first, limited to brief encounters at breakfast or stilted conversations when they passed in the hallways. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. It started with Sophia. The little girl, with her infectious laugh and boundless curiosity, had a way of drawing James out of his shell. Elena would often find them in the mansion's vast library, James reading stories to Sophia or teaching her how to play chess. One evening, about a month into their arrangement, Elena was working late in the kitchen preparing for an important dinner party the following day. She was so focused on perfecting her soufflé recipe that she didn't notice the hours slipping by. "Mommy?" Sophia's sleepy voice startled her. Elena turned to see her daughter standing in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. "Sophia, what are you doing up so late?" Eleanor quickly wiped her hands on her apron and moved to scoop up her daughter. "I had a bad dream," Sophia mumbled into Eleanor's shoulder. "I went to find you, but you weren't in your room." Guilt washed over Eleanor. She had been so caught up in proving herself in her new role that she had lost track of time. "I'm so sorry, sweetie. Mommy just got busy with work. Let's get you back to bed." "Everything okay?" James's voice came from the doorway. He was dressed in sweatpants and a t-shirt, his hair mussed as if he'd just woken up. Elena nodded, still holding Sophia. "Just a bad dream. I'm sorry if we woke you." James shook his head, stepping into the kitchen. "I was up, couldn't sleep." He looked at Sophia, his expression softening. "Hey, Munchkin, What's this about a bad dream? Sophia lifted her head from Elena's shoulder. There were monsters under my bed, she whispered. James nodded solemnly. Ah, yes. Nasty things, those under-the-bed monsters. But you know what? I happen to be an expert monster chaser. Sophia's eyes widened. You are? Oh, absolutely, James said, puffing out his chest dramatically. In fact, I have a special monster-repelling spray that I use. What do you say we go give your room a good spray down, make sure those monsters know they're not welcome? Sophia nodded eagerly, and Elena set her down. As James took the little girl's hand and led her out of the kitchen, he glanced back at Eleanor. I've got this. You finish up here. We can't have a monster-infested mansion now, can we? Eleanor watched them go, a warmth spreading through her chest. It was moments like these that made her wonder if perhaps this arrangement could work out after all. Over the next few months, a routine began to develop. Elena would spend her days running the kitchen, while James reluctantly shadowed his father at Thornton Industries. In the evenings, they would often have dinner together with Sophia, sharing stories about their days. James, to everyone's surprise, began to show a genuine interest in the family business. His natural charm and quick wit, once used solely for social climbing, proved valuable in client meetings and negotiations. You know, he said to Elena one evening as they sat on the terrace after putting Sophia to bed, I never thought I'd say this, but some of this business stuff is actually kind of interesting. Elena smiled, sipping her tea. I'm glad to hear that. Your father will be pleased, James snorted. Let's not go that far. The old man's still a long way from being satisfied with me. Helena studied him for a moment. Can I ask you something, James? Why did you resist working in the family business for so long? James was quiet for a long moment, swirling the whiskey in his glass. Honestly, I was scared, terrified actually. My father built this empire from nothing. He's brilliant, ruthless, respected. How could I ever live up to that? It seemed easier to just not try. Eleanor reached out, hesitating for a moment before placing her hand on his arm. James, you don't have to be your father. You can build your own legacy in your own way. James looked at her hand, then up at her face. Something passed between them, a moment of understanding that neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Clearing his throat, James changed the subject. So, how are your culinary classes going? Elena's face lit up. They're amazing. I'm learning so much. There's this technique for creating a perfect emulsion that I've been practicing. As Elena launched into an enthusiastic explanation of her latest culinary adventures, James found himself smiling. Her passion was infectious, and he realized he was genuinely interested in hearing about her day. Meanwhile, in his study, Maxwell Thornton III pored over reports from Thornton Industries. He'd been pleasantly surprised by James's recent performance, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. The company was successful, yes, but was it making a real difference in the world? Maxwell's gaze fell on a framed photo on his desk, himself and James's mother on their wedding day. She had always been the one to remind him of the importance of giving back, of using their wealth and influence for good. With a pang of regret, he realized how far he'd strayed from those ideals in his relentless pursuit of success. Pushing the reports aside, Maxwell began to sketch out a new plan. It was time for Thornton Industries to evolve, to become a force for positive change. And perhaps, just perhaps, his son would be the one to lead that change. As the weeks turned into months, the unlikely family settled into a rhythm. Elena's culinary skills continued to improve, earning her praise from the Thorntons' high society friends. James, to everyone's surprise, began to show a real aptitude for business, particularly in areas involving sustainable practices and ethical investments. But their comfortable routine was about to be disrupted. One crisp autumn morning, as Elena was preparing breakfast, she received a call that would change everything. Mrs. Thornton? The voice on the other end of the line was hesitant. Text here. Beside her sat a boy with a rapidly darkening black eye. Mrs. Thornton, the principal began. I'm afraid Sophia got into a physical altercation with Tommy here. She punched him. Eleanor gasped, kneeling in front of her daughter. Sophia, honey, what happened? Why would you hit Tommy? Sophia's lower lip trembled. He said you and Daddy James aren't really married, that it's all pretend, and that you're just after his money. Elena felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her. How had their arrangement become gossip for elementary school children? And more importantly, how could she explain this complex situation to her 5-year-old daughter? Before she could formulate a response, the office door burst open. James strode in, looking uncharacteristically disheveled, as if he'd rushed over in the middle of a meeting. "I came as soon as I got your message," he said to Elena, before turning to Sophia. "Hey Munchkin, you okay?" Sophia launched herself into James's arms, sobbing. "I'm sorry, Daddy James, I didn't mean to be bad, but Tommy said mean things about you and Mommy." James held her close, meeting Eleanor's worried gaze over Sophia's head. In that moment, something shifted between them. This wasn't just an arrangement anymore. Somehow, someway, they had become a family. "It's okay, sweetheart," James murmured, stroking Sophia's hair. "You're not bad. But we don't solve problems by hitting, remember? Now, why don't you apologize to Tommy? And then we'll all go home and talk about this." As they left the school, Sophia's small hand in each of theirs, Eleanor and James exchanged a look. They had a lot to discuss, and not just about Sophia's behavior. It was time to confront the reality of their situation and decide what they truly meant to each other. Little did they know, this incident would set in motion a series of events that would test their relationship, challenge their values, and ultimately lead them to discover what really matters in life. The ride home from Sophia's school was tense and silent. Eleanor's mind raced, trying to figure out how to explain their complicated situation to her daughter. James, for his part, seemed lost in thought, his brow furrowed as he stared out the car window. Once they arrived at the mansion, Eleanor took Sophia to her room for a nap, the emotional upheaval of the day having exhausted the little girl. When Elena returned to the living room, she found James pacing, running his hands through his hair. "James," Elena began hesitantly, "we need to talk about this." He turned to face her, his expression a mix of frustration and something else she couldn't quite identify. "Yeah, we do, Elena. I don't know how to do this, how to be a father, a husband, even if it's just for show. But seeing Sophia today, hearing what that kid said about us, I realized I don't want to pretend anymore." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. Was he saying what she thought he was saying? "What do you mean?" James took a deep breath. "I mean, I want this to be real. Not just for Sophia's sake, but for us. These past few months working with you, being around you and Sophia, it's changed me. I think I'm falling in love with you, Elena." The world seemed to stop for a moment as Elena processed his words. She'd been so focused on making their arrangement work, on building a better life for Sophia, that she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge the growing feelings she had for James. "James, she began, but was interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. Maxwell Thornton III strode into the room, his face grave. "James, Elena, we need to talk. There's been a development at the company." James groaned. "Dad, can this wait? We're kind of in the middle of something important here." Maxwell shook his head. "I'm afraid not. This affects all of us." He paused, looking between them. "The board is pushing for a merger with Global Corp. If it goes through, it would mean massive layoffs and the closure of several of our sustainable initiatives." Elena gasped. "But those initiatives are doing so much good. The community outreach programs, the green energy research." James nodded, his earlier confession momentarily forgotten in the face of this new crisis. "Dad, we can't let this happen. There has to be another way." Maxwell sighed heavily. "I've been fighting it, but the board is insistent. They say it's necessary for the company's growth. Unless we can come up with a viable alternative in the next month, I'm afraid my hands are tied." As Maxwell outlined the details of the proposed merger, Elena watched James. His face was set in determination, his mind clearly already working on possible solutions. In that moment, she realized that the carefree playboy she'd first met was gone. In his place stood a man ready to fight for what was right. Over the next few weeks, the mansion became a hive of activity. James threw himself into researching alternatives to the merger, often working late into the night. Eleanor, inspired by his dedication, began to explore ways her culinary skills could contribute to the company's community outreach programs. One evening, as Elena was experimenting with a new recipe in the kitchen, James burst in, his eyes bright with excitement. "Elena, I think I've got it," he exclaimed. "A way to save the company without the merger, but I'm going to need your help." As James outlined his plan, a bold initiative that combined sustainable business practices with community engagement. Elena felt a surge of pride. This was the man she'd glimpsed beneath the surface all those months ago, finally emerging in full force. "It's brilliant, James," she said softly. "But do you think the board will go for it?" James's smile faltered slightly. "That's where you come in. I need you to help me convince them. Your passion, your way with people. Elena, together I think we can make this work." Their eyes met, and suddenly the air between them was charged with unspoken emotion. They'd been so busy with work and Sophia that they hadn't had a chance to revisit James's confession from that day after the school incident. Eleanor took a step closer to him. "James, about what you said before, about wanting this to be real." James reached out, taking her hand. "I meant it, Elena, every word. These past months with you and Sophia, they've shown me what really matters in life. If you'll have me, I want to make this marriage real, not because of any arrangement or obligation, but because I love you." Tears welled up in Eleanor's eyes as she squeezed his hand. "I love you too, James. I think I have for a while now. I was afraid to admit it." As they leaned in for their first real kiss, both felt as if they were stepping into a new chapter of their lives, one filled with love, purpose, and the promise of a brighter future. But their journey was far from over. The coming weeks would test their newfound love, their dedication to their ideals, and their ability to change not just their own lives, but the lives of many others. As they pulled apart, smiling at each other, neither could have predicted the challenges and triumphs that lay ahead. The winds of change were blowing through the Thornton family, and nothing would ever be the same again. The days leading up to the board meeting were a whirlwind of activity. James and Eleanor worked tirelessly, refining their proposal and preparing their presentation. Sophia, sensing the importance of what was happening, did her best to help, offering crayon-drawn business plans and enthusiastic encouragement. The night before the big meeting, as they tucked Sophia into bed, the little girl looked up at them with serious eyes. "Are you going to save the company tomorrow?" she asked. James and Elena exchanged a glance, both moved by Sophia's understanding of the situation. "We're going to try our very best, sweetheart," Elena said, stroking her daughter's hair. "And no matter what happens," James added, "we'll still be a family. That's the most important thing." As they closed Sophia's bedroom door, Elena leaned into James, drawing strength from his presence. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" she asked softly. James took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be. With you by my side, I feel like we can accomplish anything." The next morning, they entered the Thornton Industries boardroom hand in hand. The room was filled with stern-faced executives, many of whom looked skeptical before James had even begun his presentation. For the next hour, James and Elena laid out their vision for the future of Thornton Industries. They proposed a radical shift towards sustainable practices, community engagement, and ethical business models. Elena spoke passionately about the potential for culinary programs to empower underprivileged communities, while James outlined how these initiatives could actually increase profitability in the long term. As they concluded their presentation, the room was silent. Maxwell Thornton III sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "James, Elena, I have to say I'm impressed. This is a bold vision, one that honors the legacy of this company while pushing it into the future." He turned to the rest of the board. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we have a decision to make." What followed was hours of intense debate. Some board members were enthusiastic about the new direction, while others argued fiercely for the safer option of the merger. Through it all, James and Elena stood firm, answering questions and defending their vision with passion and intelligence. As the sun began to set outside the boardroom windows, a vote was finally called. James and Elena held their breath as the results were tallied. By a margin of 1 vote, Maxwell announced, the board has decided to reject the merger and pursue the new initiative proposed by James and Elena Thornton. The room erupted in a mix of cheers and grumbles. James pulled Elena into a tight embrace, both of them laughing and crying with relief and joy. As the board members filed out, Maxwell approached the couple. "I'm proud of you both," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "You've shown true leadership today, James. You've proven that you're more than ready to take on a bigger role in this company." James nodded, squeezing Elena's hand. "Thank you, Dad. But I couldn't have done it without Elena. She's my partner in every sense of the word." Maxwell smiled, a rare sight that transformed his usually stern face. "I can see that. You two make quite a team." He paused, looking thoughtful. "You know, seeing you two together, working towards something bigger than yourselves, it reminds me of why I started this company in the first place. Somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that. But you've reminded me of what's truly important." As they left the office that evening, Elena and James felt as if they were walking on air. They had done it. They had saved the company and set it on a new, more ethical path. But their celebration was cut short by a phone call from the mansion. Sophia had fallen ill, running a high fever. They rushed home, their earlier elation replaced by worry for their daughter. The next few days were a blur of doctor's visits and sleepless nights as they cared for Sophia. Through it all, James and Elena worked as a team, supporting each other and showering Sophia with love and care. It was during one of these long nights, as they sat vigil by Sophia's bedside, that James turned to Eleanor with tears in his eyes. "I never knew I could love like this," he whispered. "Not just you, but Sophia too. She's become my daughter in every way that matters. I want to adopt her, Elena. I want us to be a real family in every sense of the word." Elena's heart swelled with emotion. "Oh, James," she said, tears streaming down her face, "nothing would make me happier." As Sophia's fever finally broke and she began to recover, James and Elena knew they had weathered their first real crisis as a family. They had emerged stronger, more united, and more in love than ever. But even as they celebrated Sophia's recovery and their new family status, neither James nor Eleanor could have predicted the final challenge that lay ahead. One that would test their love, their commitment, and everything they thought they knew about their past. As summer turned to fall, the Thornton family settled into a new rhythm. James threw himself into implementing the new initiatives at Thornton Industries, often consulting with Elena on the community outreach programs. Elena, for her part, divided her time between managing the mansion's kitchen and developing culinary education programs for underprivileged youth. Sophia, now officially James's daughter through adoption, thrived in her new family dynamic. She took great pride in helping Elena in the kitchen and loved visiting James at the office, where she had her own little desk in the corner of his office. One crisp October morning, as the family sat around the breakfast table, Maxwell Thornton III joined them, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I have an announcement to make," he said, clearing his throat. "I've decided to step down as CEO of Thornton Industries." James nearly choked on his coffee. "What? Dad, are you sure?" Maxwell nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "It's time, son. You've more than proven yourself capable of leading the company. And frankly, I'm ready to take a step back, maybe do some traveling." Eleanor reached out, squeezing Maxwell's hand. "That's wonderful news. You deserve some time for yourself." As the implications of this news sank in, James felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. He was ready for this, he knew, but the responsibility still felt enormous. Later that day, as James was packing up his things to move into the CEO's office, he came across an old photo album. Curious, he opened it and was surprised to see pictures of his mother, something his father had always kept private. As he flipped through the pages, a slip of paper fell out. It was a letter written in his mother's handwriting. With trembling hands, James began to read. "My dearest James, if you're reading this, it means you've taken your place at the head of Thornton Industries. I always knew you had it in you, even if your father sometimes doubted. Remember, true success isn't measured in dollars or stock prices, but in the lives you touch and the good you do in the world. I have a confession to make. Before I met your father, I was a chef at a small restaurant. It was my passion, my dream, but I gave it up to support your father's ambitions. Don't get me wrong, I don't regret the life we built together, but I do regret not pursuing my own dreams alongside his. That's why I want you to promise me something. When you find love, real love, don't let anything stand in its way. Support each other's dreams, grow together, and never forget the importance of balance in life. I love you, my sweet boy. I'm so proud of the man you've become. All my love. Mum." James sat back, tears streaming down his face. He had always known his mother loved him, but reading her words, understanding her sacrifices and her hopes for him, touched him deeply. In that moment, James made a decision. He quickly packed up the rest of his things and rushed home, his mind whirling with plans. When he burst through the front door of the mansion, he found Elena in the kitchen, teaching Sophia how to make pasta from scratch. The sight of them, flour-dusted and laughing, filled his heart with joy. "Elena," he said, slightly out of breath, "I need to talk to you." Sensing the importance in his tone, Elena nodded. "Sophia, sweetie, why don't you go wash up? We'll finish the pasta later." Once Sophia had left the room, James took Eleanor's hands in his. "I found a letter from my mother today," he began, his voice thick with emotion. He quickly recounted the contents of the letter, watching as tears welled up in Elena's eyes. "Oh, James," she said softly, "what a beautiful gift from your mother." James nodded, taking a deep breath. "It made me realize something, Elena. You've put your dreams on hold for this arrangement, just like my mother did. But I don't want that for us. I want us to grow together, to support each other's dreams." Eleanor's brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you saying, James?" "I'm saying," he replied, a smile spreading across his face, "that I want you to open your restaurant, the one you've always dreamed of, and I want to help you do it." Elena gasped, her eyes widening. But what about your new position as CEO? What about the mansion and all our responsibilities here?" James shook his head. "None of that matters if we're not living our truth, pursuing our passions. We'll figure it out together. Maybe we downsize, move closer to the city. Maybe I take a less hands-on role at the company. Whatever it takes, we'll make it work." Tears of joy spilled down Elena's cheeks as she threw her arms around James. "Are you sure about this?" she whispered. James held her tight, feeling more certain than he ever had in his life. "Absolutely. You and Sophia are my world, Elena. Your dreams are my dreams now." Over the next few months, their lives underwent another transformation. They found a cozy brownstone in the city, close to where Elena planned to open her restaurant. James split his time between the Thornton Industries offices and helping Elena prepare for her new venture. Sophia, ever adaptable, thrived in their new environment. She loved helping Elena plan the restaurant menu and often accompanied James to the office, where she was quickly becoming the darling of the entire staff. On the night before the grand opening of Chez Elena, James and Elena stood in the empty restaurant, taking in the realization of Elena's lifelong dream. "I can't believe we're really here," Elena said softly, leaning into James's embrace. James kissed the top of her head. "Believe it, my love. You've worked so hard for this. I'm so proud of you." As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, both reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. What had started as an arrangement, a business deal, had blossomed into a love deeper and more profound than either of them could have imagined. The next evening, as Elena's restaurant buzzed with its first customers, James stood in the kitchen doorway, watching his wife in her element. She moved with grace and confidence, directing her staff and adding final touches to dishes with the skill of a true master chef. Sophia tugged on his hand, her eyes wide with excitement. "Daddy, can I help Mommy in the kitchen?" James smiled down at her. "Of course, Munchkin, let's go see if Mommy needs her two best sous chefs." As they joined Elena in the kitchen, James felt a sense of completeness wash over him. This was what his mother had wished for him, a life filled with love, purpose, and the joy of supporting each other's dreams. Maxwell Thornton III, seated at the best table in the house, watched the scene unfold with a mixture of pride and wistfulness. He raised his glass in a silent toast to his late wife, knowing that she would have been overjoyed to see the family their son had built. As the evening wound down and the last customers left, James, Eleanor, and Sophia stood together in the empty restaurant. Sophia, tired but happy, leaned against Eleanor's legs. "We did it," Eleanor said softly, her eyes shining with tears of joy. James wrapped his arms around both of them. "No, my love, you did it. Sophia and I just had the privilege of being along for the ride." Eleanor shook her head, smiling up at him. "We did it together as a family. That's what makes it perfect." As they stood there, basking in the glow of their shared accomplishment, all three knew that this was just the beginning of their journey together. There would be challenges ahead, no doubt, But they would face them as they had faced everything else, with love, determination, and the unshakable bond of family. From an arranged marriage of convenience to a union of true love and shared dreams, James and Elena had come full circle. They had found in each other not just a partner, but a true soulmate, a co-creator of the life they both dreamed of. And as they left the restaurant that night, hand in hand with Sophia between them, they knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. A family bound not by obligation or arrangement, but by love, respect, and the joy of building a life together.